Just imagine for a second an emergency broadcast alert cutting across every channel, every screen you own. But this isn't a test, it's real. And the message is as simple as it is unbelievable. Yellowstone National Park has just been sealed off from the rest of the world. Now, the reason isn't a wildfire tearing across the landscape, and it isn't some freak storm cell building in the sky. No, it's something far more ancient and infinitely more powerful. It's a force that's been stirring miles beneath our feet, something scientists have been watching with a quiet, mounting dread, a threat that if it fully awakens won't just reshape a continent, it would redefine life as we know it.
Our story really kicks off on January 15, 2025. On that day, the vast network of sensors that act as Yellowstone's nervous system started picking up a signal unlike anything they'd seen in over 40 years of constant watching. It was this deep, low-frequency hum, a harmonic tremor coming from deep within the earth. You see, it didn't look like the sharp, spiky signature of a normal earthquake, and it didn't fit the profile of the park's usual geothermal gurgling. This was something else entirely. It was a rhythmic, sustained vibration that, to a trained ear, sounded like a warning bell. A pattern that matched, with chilling precision, the geologic precursors seen at other massive volcanoes, right before they blew.
To really grasp the threat here, you have to understand what Yellowstone actually is. It's not a volcano like you're probably picturing, a single cone-shaped mountain. It is so much bigger than that. It's a supervolcano. The entire park, this huge expansive wilderness, actually sits inside the collapsed crater, the caldera of an ancient eruption. And this caldera stretches 45 miles across. It's a massive scar on the face of the continent. And sitting right beneath it, a colossal chamber of magma, a reservoir of molten rock holding enough power to literally bury the entire United States under a thick blanket of ash. And here's the thing. Geologic history tells us this giant has woken up before. 3 times in the last 2.1 million years, it has unleashed a full-blown cataclysm. Each one of those eruptions was a planet-altering event, plunging the world into volcanic winters that could last for decades. The most recent supereruption, about 640,000 years ago, was an explosion of almost unimaginable scale. It blew over 1,000 cubic kilometers of rock and ash straight into the atmosphere. I mean, to put that into perspective for you, it was more than 1,000 times larger than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, and that event is still our benchmark for modern volcanic devastation. For decades, the prevailing wisdom from scientists gave us a little bit of comfort. We were told that a system this huge wouldn't wake up without giving us plenty of warning. We'd have years, maybe even decades, of really clear, unmistakable signs. But a new, terrifying question has started to haunt the volcanologists who watch this caldera day in and day out. What if those old assumptions were wrong? What if the giant doesn't stir slowly? What if it just wakes up suddenly, with its first warnings so subtle they're almost impossible to tell from the background noise, only to be followed by a catastrophic rapid-fire escalation? So the first real clues that something was profoundly wrong in Yellowstone didn't actually come from any sophisticated instruments. They came from the quiet observations of the people who know that park's rhythms by heart. We're talking park rangers, wildlife biologists, and veteran guides. Back in the fall of 2024, they started reporting animal behavior that was, it was strange, unsettling, and completely unprecedented. It all started with the bison, these massive animals. They're symbols of the American West, and they follow migration routes that were carved over centuries. But that October, rangers noticed the herds were moving with this weird urgency, abandoning their usual grazing spots right in the heart of the caldera. They pushed steadily east, away from all the geysers. By December, thousands of them had left the park entirely. Now that's a mass exodus you typically only see in the absolute harshest of winters. But here's the thing, the winter had been mild, the ground wasn't frozen, there was plenty of food. The bison weren't fleeing the weather, they were fleeing the earth itself. And then, the wolves started to run. In early January 2025, biologists who were tracking Yellowstone's famous wolf packs with GPS collars saw their maps just light up with bizarre activity. Entire packs were abandoning their territories, land that they had fought and bled for. They were traveling at this relentless pace through the night, covering 20, 30, even 40 miles in a single go. This wasn't hunting behavior. This was flight. Soon, the elk herds followed the bison and the wolves. Bears, who should have been just weeks into their hibernation, started emerging from their dens, all confused and agitated. And then came the most unnerving sign of all, the silence. Huge sections of the park just fell quiet. The birds were gone, the chatter of squirrels, the call of ravens, the song of finches, it all just stopped. It was as if a silent alarm, one pitched at a frequency only animals could hear, had just sounded across the entire plateau. Now, a handful of scientists at the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory knew exactly what this exodus could mean. It's a known fact that some animals can sense subtle changes in the environment that are totally invisible to us. They might be sensitive to tiny shifts in the Earth's magnetic field, or the release of gases from underground, or even infrasound, vibrations too low for the human ear to hear. And all of those things are documented precursors to major volcanic eruptions. The animal exodus was the trigger. It sent scientists scrambling back to their data, looking for the signal that the animals had clearly already heard.
And when they looked again, they found it. For months, the park had been having thousands of tiny little earthquakes, but they were dismissed as just typical background noise. But now, looking with this new urgency, a terrifying pattern emerged. The tremors weren't random at all. They were migrating. The data clearly showed the quakes started deep, about 20 kilometers down, and were systematically moving upward, getting shallower week by week. This was the classic signature of magma rising up through the crust, fracturing rock as it forced its way toward the surface. By mid-January, the swarm had risen to a depth of just 5 kilometers. The magma was getting dangerously close.
At the exact same time, the air itself began to change. Monitoring stations that basically sniff the gases coming out of the park's vents recorded a sudden, dramatic spike in sulfur dioxide. Now, this gas is a key component of magma. When you see more and more of it being released, it means magma is rising and depressurizing, kind of like when you open a can of soda. After years of stable readings, sulfur dioxide emissions tripled in 1 week, and then they doubled again. The volcano was beginning to exhale.
And then the ground itself started to move. In just 40 days, satellite measurements confirmed the caldera floor was bulging upward at an alarming rate. An area miles wide had risen by 11 centimeters, that's nearly 4.5 inches. The ground was being physically pushed up from below, deformed by a massive body of magma that they estimated to be the size of the city of Los Angeles, gathering just beneath the surface. These weren't just clues anymore, they were pieces of a conclusion. The whole system was pressurized, energized, and waking up.
A full-scale VEIA super eruption, you have to understand it isn't just one big event. It's a cascading sequence of destruction, a planetary catastrophe that would unfold over hours, then days, and then for years to come.
It would all begin with earthquakes. And I'm not talking about the small tremors that came before it. I mean titanic shocks, magnitude 7 or 8, that would rupture the ground and be felt clear across the country. The entire caldera floor would start to fracture. Long fissures, miles in length, would just split open, venting superheated steam and gas in a deafening roar as the magma below violently flashes the groundwater to steam.
Then comes the main event, the roof of the magma chamber, the rock cap that's holding back trillions of tons of pressure. It shatters. A column of ash, rock, and gas explodes upward at supersonic speed, punching a hole clean through the atmosphere to a height of 40 miles, right into the darkness of near space. The sheer power of that blast would create its own weather. Violent storms of volcanic lightning and hurricane-force winds would just swirl around the base of the column. But what goes up must come down. Within an hour, that immense eruption column, too dense to support its own wake, would collapse back on itself. And this collapse triggers the single most destructive force in all of volcanology, pyroclastic flows. These are not lava. They are ground-hugging avalanches of white-hot ash and poisonous gas, superheated to hundreds of degrees, and moving across the landscape at speeds up to 450 miles per hour.
Anything and everything within a 100-mile radius of that caldera would be utterly annihilated, incinerated, and buried in seconds. Cities like Jackson, Wyoming, West Yellowstone, Montana, they would simply cease to exist. There would be no survivors. But that devastation, as absolute as it is only the beginning. The real threat to civilization is what happens next.
For days, maybe even weeks, the volcano would just keep pumping ash into the jet stream. Within hours, the skies over the entire Rocky Mountain region would turn to pitch black. Within just 2 days, a thick layer of ash would cover Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Colorado. It would fall like this toxic gray snow blanketing absolutely everything. Now, you have to understand, this volcanic ash isn't like the ash from a campfire. It's made of tiny, sharp particles of rock and glass. It's heavy, it's abrasive, and it's corrosive. And when it gets wet, it forms this dense concrete-like slurry.
It will cause roofs to collapse under its weight. It will clog every engine and filter, grinding our entire modern society to a halt. Power grids, water systems, transportation, agriculture, everything across the central United States would be completely paralyzed. The whole region would become uninhabitable.
And globally, the effects would be catastrophic. All that fine ash and sulfur dioxide shot into the stratosphere would form this aerosol layer that would circle the entire planet, reflecting sunlight back into space. Global temperatures would plummet by several degrees, kicking off a volcanic winter that could last for a decade. We've seen this before. In 1815, the eruption of Mount Tambora, which was a much smaller eruption than Yellowstone would be, led to 1816's Year Without a Summer, causing massive crop failures and famine all over the world. A Yellowstone eruption would be an order of magnitude worse.
So the most critical question in modern volcanology isn't if we'll get a warning, it's how much warning we'll get. For years, the general thinking was that the buildup would be slow, giving us plenty of time to prepare. But recent science has delivered a deeply, deeply unsettling answer.
There was a groundbreaking study in 2017 from Arizona State University. Researchers analyzed these microscopic crystals that were preserved in the ash from Yellowstone's last super eruption. And inside these crystals are chemical records, kind of like tree rings, that document the changing conditions inside the magma chamber leading up to the eruption. And the findings were shocking. They show that the final stage of magma recharge and pressurization, the process that ultimately triggered the cataclysm, it didn't happen over thousands of years. It happened in a matter of mere decades. The system went from a relatively stable state to the brink of eruption in a geological eye blink.
This discovery basically means that all our old models are potentially obsolete. A supervolcano can, if the conditions are right, destabilize with terrifying speed. So that begs the question, right? Are the current signs, the migrating earthquakes, the ground surge, the gas spikes, are they the beginning of a centuries-long process? Or are they the signs of a rapid reactivation event, just like the one recorded in those ancient crystals, happening right now? Because if that's the case, the timeline for an eruption isn't measured in generations. It could be measured in years, or even months.
And this leads to the nightmare scenario that's quietly discussed in the halls of government and geology departments. What if we are already in that final rapid escalation phase? What if the events of the past few months are not the early warnings, but the last warnings? What if the system is already past its tipping point, locked into a sequence that just cannot be reversed?
Think about it. The logistical challenge of evacuating the American West, even with years of warning, would be the greatest migration in human history. To even attempt it with only months or weeks would be impossible. It would trigger a societal collapse before the first ash ever fell. Highways would become parking lots, supply chains for food, water, and fuel would just break down, civil order would disintegrate, the humanitarian crisis would actually precede the natural one.
And so, while the official public statement remains cautiously optimistic, assuring everyone that there is no immediate threat, the private conversations are very different. FEMA, the Department of Defense, other agencies, they are running models for an event they know they cannot manage. They're grappling with an impossible question. How do you evacuate tens of millions of people from a continent-sized disaster zone in a matter of weeks? The truth is, there is no good answer. We are, by any rational measure, catastrophically unprepared.
Today, if you go to Yellowstone, on the surface, the park appears just as it always has. Peaceful, beautiful, wild. You'll see tourists watching Old Faithful erupt right on schedule. You'll see bison grazing in the Lamar Valley. The illusion of permanence, it's powerful. But beneath that surface, the instruments are telling a completely different story. They're painting a portrait of a system under immense and undeniable stress. The pattern of activity that's currently being observed is precisely what scientists would expect to see in the run-up to a major eruption. Now, while it's not a guarantee that one is imminent, it's also a signal that cannot and must not be ignored. For the scientists who are the watchers on the wall, this is their daily reality. They live with this profound uncertainty, knowing that the stakes are higher than in almost any other human endeavor. They know that volcanoes do not operate on human schedules. They are forces of deep time, governed by physics we are only just beginning to understand. So they watch, they listen, they measure, and they hope to God their calculations are right.
Look, Yellowstone may not erupt in our lifetime, or in our children's lifetime, but the geological truth is inescapable. The magma is there. The heat source that feeds it is active. The cycle will eventually repeat. A super eruption at Yellowstone is not a question of if, it is only and always a question of when.
Deep in the Earth's crust, miles beneath one of our planet's most beautiful landscapes, something ancient is stirring. The forces that shape worlds are completely indifferent to the civilizations that rise and fall on the surface. The planet keeps its own time. So the question we are all left with is not what the Earth will do, but what we will do when it finally decides to act.